Good day of some sort of time and place, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. This is Sunrise Disco, where we go very, very slowly through discovery and all the faith studies to supplement your faith. We are catering to the great people of St. Anthony of Padua Parish in Vancouver. Come join us. Well, not now, because that will get you arrested possibly. But in the future, join us. And you can also join us on YouTube. That's the safe way to do things. I am joined by my two guests, my two regular compatriots, Linus Juan and Chris DeSanto. Fellas, how are you doing on this fine day?
I'm doing good, Nathan. Thanks for asking. It's the weather's been really good, so enjoying going out for walks.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's been a good week. Been a lot going on for me, but it's good to kind of sit down and settle into some podcasting.
Wonderful. Yes. It's been a busy week for myself as well. It's kind of weird that we're not really allowed to go and do as much as we used to for various reasons. Unless, of course, you're tuning in from Florida. But for
shout out to our Florida audience.
Yeah. Welcome. Shout out to our Florida fans. We do have some people down there that very much dig St. Anthony's. Anyway, is there anything going on in your guys' lives you like to get off? Like to share anything in particular in the world? Maybe more specifically, how God's working in your life, how you see God working, before we kind of dive into our topic today.
Easter's coming to a close in a few weeks, and I mean, it was such a busy time for everyone. And I think, especially now, it's so evident how much people need the masses. I think it was so heartbreaking for everyone to find out they weren't able to go to masses for the Easter season. So it was really hard. But I think all in all, I think people I think it's been really eye opening for me, I guess, because I never had to stop going to masses just because I was part of the live streaming team. But it was really sad to see people, or at least to talk to people and hear how disappointed they were. So yeah, I mean, I'm always grateful about being able to go to mass. So
yeah,
I'm having a bit of a Jobian day, I think.
Jobian.
A Jobian day, yes. So I recently put down a healthy sum of money towards an electric bicycle.
Nice.
And then, so I put the money went in on Tuesday. We record on Thursdays, for just in case our viewers are wondering. And so on this day, that is Earth Day, which I totally forgot, the provincial government announced that PST is no longer applicable to this thing that I spent a large amount of money on.
Oh no.
So I it's like, okay, fine. I didn't know this was coming up. Demand is going to go up the roof even more. So there's no guarantee that if I had waited, that this would have, that I would have been able to save that kind of money. But it's still a bit frustrating. And then I guess the two of you have known that I've been in a long distance relationship for a good period of time now, and we were planning to do a little meetup towards the end of the Victoria Day long weekend. And then just a couple weeks ago, we've got some very, very stringent government announcements in both of our respective provinces that really make it very clear that kind of activity is not permitted at the moment. But then the funny thing was that so we pivoted to another date in a month later, and then I just found out today that I've been summoned to sit in a criminal trial potentially. So. Yay.
It's always fun.
Yeah, and that's gonna overlap with that second fallback date. So I'm having one of those days.
Oh yeah,
it's a challenging time for sure. Oh, criminal trial though. That's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah. How about you, Nathan?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Chris, you bring up Easter. To be honest with you, I was looking forward to having to be able to go to one mass, but that was taken down uh, right before Easter, and that was not that great. But silver lining, much of COVID has been a silver lining for me in a way because being challenged to such a degree that what's going on just clearly makes no sense to me whatsoever. And seeing things and policies that, frankly, even people that might agree that we should be scared out of our pants about things, they even have questions about, oh, why is Costco open but churches aren't? But so seeing this dissonance between all these things has really brought me closer to reflect on my faith and draw closer to Jesus and say, yeah, what's going on here? And with that has been some graces. One, my faith is more convicted ever as the world becomes even more of a fantasy than people that disagree with Christianity say Christianity is. It makes me go, oh, his faith is sounding more and more accurate every day, and that's one thing. And this in
Wait,
particular,
Nathan. Does that mean
yes.
that you're saying, is this real life or is this just fantasy?
Stop.
Oh, very good,
Boo.
very good, very good. Yes,
Sorry, continue.
but yeah, and particularly Easter. Easter has been it was a blessing in that I got to experience a feeling of suffering and actually been joyful with the suffering. And so I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but I really felt every mass from Holy Thursday until Easter Sunday morning. Um, it also coincides. It's actually this Easter vigil, and specifically is the 10th anniversary of my conversion to the Catholic faith. So I don't know. Usually people,
Congrats.
yeah, thank you, yeah, yeah. So um, I'm a bit sour that we didn't. I get to actually be in church for that, but but at the same time, it's something to be thankful for. Anyway, at this point, we're doing what we're doing, and Christ is still doing wonderful things in people's lives. And yeah, God never gives up on His people. So,
Amen.
amen to that. So, yeah. So before we dive in, we have our first viewer question. We want to thank you for submitting this question to us. And please feel free to submit comments and questions for anything that you hear on this podcast or for any thoughts that you have. And we'd love to share them here on Sunrise Disco. Okay, so the question is, how can we explain/maintain our notion of objective truth without invalidating people who don't agree with us? Catholics don't necessarily say that our beliefs are subjective, and non-believers' truths are equally valid, right? Though there's another question of whether subjective belief holds less strength than the objective. The main reason about this is because I was wondering if the strength of beliefs would be weaker if we don't view it as objective.
It's
So,
a fun question.
That's a fun
yeah,
question. Well, I mean, just for the last posit in the question, I mean, beliefs are like amplified and kind of affirmed based off of your experiences, right? Like this is like non-objective beliefs. So like let's say I believe my dad is a good person, and that belief is affirmed through his interaction with other people, my interaction with the people he's interacted, my interaction with him, and you can almost believe it's true, but that is a opinion of him, right? So that would be a subjective belief that is like stronger because of affirmation, but objective beliefs don't have strength because they're based on like the truth. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. So just for that last posit. But I mean, does anyone want to address the actual question? I mean, I'm down to listen to someone else talk for a little bit.
I mean, I think you kind of touched on it already, Chris, right? You
Yeah.
don't believe something is true because it's objective. You believe it because it's true, right? And um, and the way that you come to that belief has to be a subjective experience,
Uh-huh.
because if it were an objective experience, you would have to divorce yourself from the question to kind of look at it from every angle.
Yeah.
Whereas the questions of faith and the questions of truth are, because the truth is so immense that you can't divorce yourself from it. You can't separate yourself. So if the question you were pondering was, is the world real? You can't separate yourself from the world to kind of analyze that question from every possible angle and then re-enter the world to kind of conclude, yes, I can conclude that the world is real,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in that sense, like the object truth is there because it is the big T truth, and we believe that God is truth, right? So we come, like, that is the objective reality that we bump up against.
Mm-hmm.
But we come to understand that bumping up motion through our subjective experiences. So in the sense that, if you were a blind person walking along a path and there's a massive rock in your way, if somebody tells you there's a big rock in your way, then you can kind of like, you can either accept it or you can ignore it and just keep bumbling along the path, feeling your way around.
Yeah.
But if you get to a point where you've actually come up against a giant rock in your path and there's no way around it, like, that rock is objectively there. It is not moving. It is not going to change around you.
Yeah, it's
Right.
not based off of your perception. It exists independent of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember, I think one of the biggest examples of like subjective truth is what was that thing where it's like three blind monk are feeling an elephant. They're all, these are okay, so I think it would look like this, or I think it would be I believe it would be like this, right? They're all not necessarily wrong, right, in their beliefs of it, but the objective truth is that it's an elephant. But at the same time, like, it's so hard for humans to separate ourselves from the way we experience the world and reality subjectively, because we cannot separate it, right? Like our emotions and our perception of things are based on ourselves and our experience, right? um I think the biggest part of this question is, how do we explain what we believe without invalidating people who don't agree with us, right? Because obviously if you say, oh well, ours is the capital T truth, it kind of invalidates what they're saying, because it seems like a cop out. You know what I'm saying? Without explanations, like, oh, our truth is a capital T, it's objective, therefore there's no need for explanation, right? So how do we explain that? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Linus is the most theologically studied of us,
Oh,
but
jeez.
so I'll let him build off of what I'm about to
Good
say.
segue, Nathan. I love it.
But to be honest with you, I spent a lot of time, especially early in my conversion, trying to find ways to make Catholicism more true, to try and meet those doubters and be like, no, it is objectively true because of this and this and this. But the fact is, we are like those blind monks, because we only get a piece of it. And frankly, there's no point. I mean, we should always pursue truth, and we should always study the scripture. We should always dive into the great saints and the doctors of the church to form us and to root ourselves in our faith. But there's just so much mystery there that will never fully be explained. And to me, there's no reason to have to fully explain it. And one of the things I think we do in our world that I think is wrong is that it becomes a power dynamic. this thing is true because I want it to be true, and we're pushing it to be true. And you have to fight back and be like, well, this is true because this is what I think is true, and it makes me feel good and stuff like that. And that's silly. Truth is truth. And frankly, we shouldn't be afraid of the truth, even if it might not necessarily convince the non-Christian or non-believer in front of us that we're talking about. We say what is true, what we know to be true, and admit why do you believe it? Well, frankly, it just feels right. Frankly, it's just, I don't fully understand everything about the church, but an example I would give, a very good friend of mine, when we were traveling down to Seattle, we got into a huge argument about Catholicism.
Classic.
And he doesn't like a lot of my views that I've taken since converting to Catholicism, kind of doing a 180 on abortion, gay marriage, and all the big hot button issues. It's like, Nathan, you've been manipulated by these people. And I'm like, not true at all. And, and I was trying to use, and that's where I used a lot of those, like trying to make the church objectively true, trying to pick out all the talking points to subvert. And I actually lost the debate in terms of objective truth, because he brought up statistics about sexual abuse with priests and hypocrisy in the church, which frankly, upon further review, 100% right. I was underplaying it. I was using the talking points to try and justify my point. But over time, he texted me a year later and he said, I'm really sorry for attacking you so hard about your faith. I still don't think I still think like you're up Pooh Creek here with the church. And I have no interest in becoming, well, he's actually a fallen away Catholic, of kind of reverting to his faith. But at the same time, I can see that the change in your life and the positive things that have gone in your life, I can't explain that. And the only change that you've made is your religion. So I think what I'm trying to say is that and I learned a lesson, there's no reason to try to make Christianity more real in quotation marks when it just is. And you know that, or we know that, we choose to know that. And as we further establish a relationship with Jesus Christ, I think he gives us more and more conviction and more ability to articulate that. But, it's kind of like you don't need to do the work for God if you're not equipped to do it at that time.
Yeah, I think the other aspect that I would add, and this is more from my own personal experience and not from my academic studies, of which there are, would like to remind everyone, consists of 2 philosophy courses, and that's it. So I did the Camino, so the Camino de Santiago to Compostela, and it's a pilgrimage, that the Way of St. James, and it's a series of paths that go from various points around Europe to Santiago de Compostela, where St. James is buried. And the thing about the Camino is that it runs counter to every intuition you have about travel, in the sense that when you're traveling, you typically know what hotel you're going to be staying in at the end of the day. And you've looked up all the reviews on TripAdvisor to find the best hotel that you want to stay in. You might not have every hour of your day planned out, but you've got a general idea of what you're doing each day when you're on vacation. You don't get that when you're on the Camino. You get a guidebook, which is very horribly written and does not give a lot of details, except for a very bird's eye view kind of map. And you get a series of arrows that are either spray painted onto street signs and the back of stop signs and on sidewalks and other random areas that you don't really know where to expect to look. Or if you're lucky, you get the fancy, like, lacquered porcelain Camino shell with arrow and how many kilometers you have to go, right? And making that trip, it's really a question of trust. Do you trust the system that's in place, that's guided millions of pilgrims since the medieval ages to their destination, or are you going to stop, pull up Google Maps, and like follow the Google blue line as you go from point A to point B? Like the thing is that the Google method is definitely more safe, but what usually happens is that Google usually sends you along what may not necessarily be the right path. And the wonderful thing about this system is that the locals know that there's a lot of pilgrims on the path. They will flag you down and wave at you and point you in the right direction if they see you take the wrong one on a fork. And then you have a general idea of where the hostels are, but you don't know if they're going to be full or not by the time you get there. And sometimes they are full and you have to keep going, and other times you're lucky and you get the last two spots that are there. But that's the beauty of this whole analogy, extended analogy, is that it really reflects our journey toward. It's a microcosm of our journey towards God and our search for truth, because you can't take the Google Maps view. You can't just look at it, pick your spot. In my case, I started in Fatima. I can't just Google Maps Fatima walking to Santiago de Compostela, see 600 kilometers. It doesn't work like that. The way it works is that you kind of go and you actually make those steps and you follow those arrows as they point you towards where to go. And sometimes you get your guidebook has a moment of lucidity, and you get some really good maps of a town and how to navigate your way through it, or that the yellow arrow you think you're following is actually the right yellow arrow, and it isn't, I don't know, a construction worker trying to tell a dump truck where to go for a construction site. So kind of to bring it back to this question, the objective truth, the object of this whole adventure is to get to your destination, Santiago de Compostela. We as Catholics believe that we have been revealed a way to achieve that means. That doesn't invalidate people who believe things that are opposite of that. What we believe to be objectively true, we fully believe to be objectively true, and we base our reality around that because it is the objective truth. That doesn't necessarily mean that other methods are incorrect. For all we know, they could end up in the same spot, but that doesn't change the fact that from what we can see of that alternate route, that alternate view, from what we see of it in that particular moment, it could point to the exact opposite. So I think that kind of addresses everything about that question, if that makes any sense.
It totally does make sense. And I think we were led to believe through our experience that like this is the way to Jesus, right? And like there's a bunch of different ways. We just have to trust that God is right there with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, the path is not a linear path. It's not a Google Map path. So one of the things that I find that I think I love the fact that our faith can, on the surface level, be like, well, wait a second, this can't be true because of like, where's the science? What about this? Or how could all these miracles have happened? I haven't seen any since, or whatever. But the one thing about the Bible is like it's not a straight road. There's like so many different contradictions, And at the same time, though, to stress on what you were saying, Linus, it doesn't mean that a non-believer is invalid on every single choice or judging morality or whatever the case. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that you're morally more superior than a non-believer. It just means that thankfully, you've found the truth in Jesus Christ, and you have the opportunity to follow him more closely to get a taste of heaven on earth before going to heaven yourself. That's the only difference. But the other person might have the objective physical truth on a number of issues that you may not. And I think it's silly for us to say that just because we're Christians, we should just be entitled to know more or be more special than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. What a tangent.
Mm-hmm.
What a question. That's a great question, though.
But to be honest with you, this question has been a good segue into what we're going to be discussing now. Speaking of truth and knowledge, maybe a tree of knowledge.
Ooh.
And I think there's some meat on the bone here to go. So, all right, we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. Who wants to read that?
All right, so Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 to 7. Now the serpent was more subtle than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say, 'You shall not eat of any tree of the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But God said, You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons."
Okay, so the question says, we learned that God's love is unconditional, personal, and secure. So there must be a loving reason why he would put one tree in the garden from which Adam and Eve were not to eat. How does this make sense and be consistent with who God is?
I can hash at it, Linus, if you want to go next. I'll
You're
go
up to you, man.
All right, I can hash at it. I mean, it's that whole why do we have free will argument, right? I mean, this is like quite a big part of our faith, is that we have the free will to choose to love and obey God or to not. If there was no tree that you couldn't eat, which is in the garden, then there would be no choice, right? You would never have to listen to what God had to say, or he would never have to tell you what to do, because nothing in the garden like would prevent you from being with God, right? Like everything he made was perfect. Therefore, you would have no choice but to love him, right? But he needed to create that tree, because by doing so and by telling them to not eat it, he was giving them the choice to obey and love him. And the choice is what makes it truly authentic, right? Like, for example, if you're in a relationship, let's say I'm in a relationship and we spend a lot of time together, and my girlfriend says, "I love you," right? She has the free will to tell me that she loves me or not, but she tells me she loves me, and I feel good. Now, let's say one of my constituents has kidnapped her family and said, "You have to tell him that you love him." There's no choice in that, and it's inauthentic for her to say, "I love you," and there's no meaning in that. So definitely the free will aspect of that of love and the choice that you can make to love and obey God is definitely why the tree was there. It's to authenticate our love for him.
I think the aspect that I would add, because I think the typical atheist response is, well, why does God bother giving the choice, right? Why does God need people to love him? And the key to that actually lies in Genesis chapter 1, because in verse 26, it reads, God says, "Let us make man in our image and likeness." And then in verse 27, It says God created man to his own image. To the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. So the key aspect to note is, well, two things. So if 26 has image and likeness, and 27 only has image. And the other aspect is that the verb is different, right? 26 is make, and 27 is create. In the Latin, it's faciamus in 26, and 27 is creavit, right? So God creates us in his image, but he makes us to his likeness, right? And so that means that we're made in the image of God, but to be in the likeness of God requires us to act like him. And an aspect of God is that God is love, right? And so the love is necessary to the relationship between God and man through that angle, because without it, then God has not made man to his image and likeness.
That's actually really cool. I did not know that, but that totally makes sense. It's like creavit is the verb to create, right? So he has created us on like a material subatomic level to be in his image, but make, it's like almost like there's a physical aspect of make, like of I'm thinking of like tempered welding and stuff. He makes us in his likeness. Like it requires action, like definitely what you said. And in order to be that, we have to be like God. And what is God but love, right? God is love.
Yeah.
That's so good. Actually, I'm gonna take that one.
I mean, this whole adventure with this tree of knowledge of good and evil is really like it's a microcosm of the larger I guess adventures of sin and choice. Right? Like I had it explained to me once that like the morality of God is like if you were in a room in which you were very thirsty and you saw lots and lots of containers with a clear liquid. And you know some of these liquids are water, and you know that some of these other liquids are one of these many, many other chemicals that are out there in the world that have all the properties of water except for the fact that they will kill you. Such
Classic.
as hydrofluoric acid, which is my favorite one, which has the density of water, the transparency of water, the smell of water. But it's one of the strongest acids in the world, and if you get some on your skin, it will dissolve your bones. So if you're really thirsty and you're stuck, and you know that you're stuck between the choice of two containers, like you really hope that if you're guessing that that's not going to be the one with hydrofluoric acid, because that's going to hurt. So God in his mercy kind of goes in and he puts labels on all of these containers of liquid. All right. And so he tells us this one is water, this one is hydrofluoric acid, this one is vodka. All right. And so in that same manner, we're all looking for something within ourselves and within our life, and God kind of and we have an array of choices that are available to us of different actions, and God in his kindness points out those actions that are going to be detrimental to our spiritual health, right? But it's up to us to kind of to either follow those instructions and read all the symbols, all those women symbols that he puts on those glasses of liquid, or we can say, you know what, I am gonna take my chances.
Yeah, it's like, do we trust that God is protecting us, right?
Mm-hmm.
A bit of a curveball to throw at you guys.
I love curveballs. You already know that, bro.
I'm more of a change-up person, but that's okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm throwing with my southpaw. So, what if I like your analogy? These WMIS labels on the different types of acid and the one type of water. What if, though, that the labeler, in this case the church, were to mislabel these things for their own selfish gain? That they have chosen evil, that they are the guidepost for some person who is, up until this point, innocent and wanting to love God, but then relabels, and the person is now drinking metaphoric uh, acid and poison.
So I think the main thing to kind of keep in mind is that the person who is in reality drinking is objectively drinking poison, but is subjectively believing, honestly believing that that's water, right? And so it's not any fault of that person, if which I guess is a bit of a cold comfort in our analogy, that like so in that respect, it's not it's not the fault of that person that that they ended up how they did, because they did their due diligence. For all intents and purposes, it's the nefarious mislabelers that screwed up the material safety data sheet, right? And so if it was revealed that our mislabelers was working with a vicious intent, then that would be, I mean, if from a real world perspective, that there would be serious repercussions, right? Potentially even criminal ones, right? So and kind of extrapolating that back over, right? One of the elements that make a mortal sin is that you have to be aware that it's a mortal sin. If you honestly did not know, then it's not. It doesn't negatively affect your relationship with God. And similarly, like that's kind of like the beauty of obedience, right? From a historical perspective, I think we all know that I was just following orders is not a suitable defense in a criminal court. But if in the eyes of the church, if you honestly believed and were that your spiritual director or your shepherd was giving the right thing, giving you the right advice, and you were following that out of obedience, then like the beauty of God's mercy is that it isn't on you, right?
Yeah, you're not held culpable for the actions because you were led astray. It's kind of like it's kind of, well, I guess the label thing doesn't really work there because you'll die,
Yeah.
right, if you drink the poison. But let's say God sent a dude to tell you to do something, right? But if you do it wrong, like that's not a reflection on God, or it's a reflection on the person who he sent. And it's also it has no reflection on you because you just did what you thought God wanted, right? And that's like above everything, like love, because you loved him.
And like I think it's Saint Ignatius of Loyola who has this really amazing line, which is like, I think it's like, what appears to me white, I will see as black if the church so defines. And I think like that's the beauty of it, as it were, is that the church as the representative of the truth is we give that loyalty to the church, and there, if the church misuses that, then the God in his mercy kind of he's not able to kind of stop the gears of time itself and intervene that way, but he's still able in his own way to save us.
I guess more the thing that I'm just throwing out there um, is the church can lead you. Well, the humans in the church can misuse and mislabel things. I think of the priest sex abuse scandal and the bishops who didn't do anything about it, and the scores of people that will never possibly, unless God is able to get through to their heart. But by all intents and purposes, the very pathway to heaven has been severed for them grievously. Now, of course, they are not guilty of having done these horrific things. They were victims, of course, and we hope that that the pain on earth that they have is not what they deal with for eternal life after. But the fact is that these people who, frankly, on a logical level, could never want to come back and seek God in His church ever again, and therefore it is just how is, I guess, how is that rectified? I mean, it's very clear in these 7 verses that Adam and Eve had a choice. God was very clear, and God was loving, and God never did anything because He can't, because He's perfect, to steer them in the wrong direction, and they were deceived, and they were manipulated to follow their egos and their own desires that go against God. But for those that are taken away from God in a way, how can they come back?
So the way that I kind of see it is that, like, it's obviously unjust in that sense, right? Because you want everyone to have that opportunity to encounter God within their own lives, and then to choose Him because we know that He is all good, all true, and all beautiful. But, like, in the grand scheme of things, there are a lot of injustices within this world, right? Like, some people are born into circumstances where they will never get the chance to encounter the Lord. They may be born into a particular country that is going out of its way to present one side to the Vatican and then present another side to the church that lives within it. And you're right. It is unjust. It's not fair for these people to not be afforded those kinds of opportunities. So the way that I've kind of always seen it was that they're like the only consolation that they have, the only I guess opportunity that they have for justice is the one at the end. Right? That is, and at the end of the day, that's the only justice that matters. Right? It doesn't matter if you get if we magically change the world in such a way that everybody gets the same chances to encounter God and to love Him for who He is. It would be nice, but it's not the I think it would, if we were actually to achieve that goal, we would pat ourselves on the back for saying that we are great in achieving that justice while missing the point of the bigger justice, the bigger mercy, that where the two have kissed, that is just around the corner.
Yes, that is all very true, and I mean, history shows time and time again that those that have been granted with much piss it away,
Mm-hmm.
and and at times, I mean, how wonderful it would be for a person to go through something heroic like abuse and come out of it as somebody later on in life, to come back and to mold his life around Christ. I mean, you'd have to pray for the for the labeler, the priest or bishop soul, because I mean, I guess their reward would not be would probably be much worse than that person's life, even if lived and destitute.
I think the main thing that needs to be addressed is that the only way people can live through that is it's founded on the belief that God is just, that God is equally just as much as He loves us, right? Um, and that is the only thing that that allows us to fully trust in the church and what they do, is because we believe God is just, right? Because if, like, without that belief, then obviously we have every right to be naive and cynical, because then it would truly be a church run by people, right? But we believe God is just and loving, and that everything that happens is ultimately according to what He uh well at least everything that has happened has been according to what He foresaw, or what He plans anyway.
All right, so what attitudes, beliefs, or misconceptions were at the root of Adam and Eve's choice to disobey? And more, what is at the root of our uh, choice of disobeying?
Um, I think it's the original Greek word for sin translates more literally towards missing the mark. In the sense that we were striving towards something, and we just totally did a total faceplant. Um, or right. So there is a an honest to goodness um, drive towards uh, one of the transcendentals that was that Adam and Eve kind of were demonstrating, and that they, in a sense, they were willing to take a shortcut for that, and um, that pushed them into the realm of mortal sin. In the same way, I remember I was reading an article in the New York Times that was talking about um, like the rise of polyamory within today's society, and there's a the article kind of interviewed a bunch of people, and they all kind of point to this term they use, which was like new relationship energy, right? There's a joy and an excitement in beginning a new relationship, um, that is that really captivates them, and because of that, they kind of keep engaging in it, right? Because there's more and more people to kind of invite into their family, essentially, right? That they can have, right? And that, like, that drive to kind of be able to express that love and that joy, um, is a genuinely good thing to have. It's the thing is just that they're manifesting it in ways that run against what we have been labeled, or what has been labeled for us to be incorrect. All right, and so the further they go into it, it's that joy is becoming more and more fleeting and more empty, which is why they have to keep engaging in it, right? Whereas, the my first thought when I read that article was that you could get new relationship energy by having children, right? You get that exact same high that these people are talking about, um, but you do it in a way that has been labeled to us to be something that is good, and it's going to, because of the nature of that, you're going to get so much more than just the new relationship energy. You get the joy of watching that child continue to grow and become their own person, and like and go beyond that, right? um So I think there's the attitude that they had was ultimately the right one. Um, right? The serpent tells them that, you know, um, whatever your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Right? And that is something that we will be given one day. It'll be given to us at the end of time, and we will come to understand at the last judgment what was really good and what was really evil. But that's something that they decided to take a shortcut for, and that's kind of the misconception, was that it was something that they needed to achieve rather than something that to wait to be given, to trust to be given.
I think it's like the true nature of humans to always chase after the transcendentals, right? Goodness, beauty, and the other one,
Truth.
knowledge, truth. Yeah, truth. Yeah, knowledge, truth. It's like the it's like human nature to always yearn for those things, and those things are like attributed to God, right? But as humans, like it totally makes sense how sin is translated to missing the mark. Like we always fail to realize that what we are looking for is God, and we look for things that obviously like almost bastardize the meaning of those transcendentals, right? And I think on top of that, yeah, it was the wish to have autonomy and make their own decisions, like to exercise their free will and disobey in order to in order to achieve one of the transcendentals, right? Like they want their eyes to be open, they want to see truth as God does, but unbeknownst to them, like everything they're looking for is in God, but they fail to realize that because they're human and their scope of reality is so small compared to God's. What are your thoughts on the question?
Yeah.
Nathan, Linus and I have been just hashing and chilling.
You've done a
You're the
perfect
host, but
job
you
of
can
hiding
talk.
away, Nathan.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I was hiding. I was letting the contributors speak and share their breadth of knowledge, not stifling their freedom of speech and freedom of thought and
I
freedom of
see.
expression. Someone's got to live up to the charter. Anyway,
You're giving us the free will to talk, but now we're using that free will to let you talk.
oh, it's very good. Look at the trust and obedience that you guys are showing here.
It's because I love you, Nathan.
That's right. That is love lived out right there. That is it. Perfect. Yeah, no, I liked, Linus, your point about the polyamory, and as a person who has chosen not to engage in that lifestyle and do the opposite, the normal thing, the thing God tells us to do, and get married, um, it just it's it's so hard to understand. I mean, I understand where people are coming from, because yes, even in marriage, and I have the most perfect wife, so I'm lucky. But there are times where, yeah, you feel like, oh, this is getting old, this is getting stale. It's slight moments, but I mean, every married person probably has that, because it's the monotony of life that kind of continues. And yes, having children kind of re-energizes things, but I think in today's culture we have this instant gratification, and I think one of the things I hope that, as we correct ourselves, or God corrects us, as he probably will, and hopefully sooner than later, here, that's my instant gratification. I'm asking God to make this correction for what I see, is that we see the eternal truths of marriage, of right thinking, of following the commandments as good and restorative. And the grace. I mean, one of the things that I love about marriage is the fact that it is eternal. That it's something. Well, it's not eternal, but it's a truth, and that it's living rightly is so much better than seeking what was that term? The new relationship buzz or something?
Yeah, new relationship energy.
New
NRE,
relation.
as the kids call it.
Oh my goodness, they even have an acronym. Oh, I sound like an old man saying that, don't I?
Acronyms. How millennial.
How millennial.
Lol.
And yes, lol.
How Gen Z.
Yeah, but it's just yeah. I mean, it makes sense, but it's so. Yeah, I'm hearing it, and I'm just like, because eventually it runs out. Eventually, if you live in the lie long enough, you do end up dying. You die to what you think is true, and because you have to face the reality of those choices. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this. I heard the polyamory thing, and I don't get it.
It was quite interesting actually to hear.
Well, I mean, it is interesting, and it does make sense of filling that emotional need constantly without having to deal with what you think is like, oh, this settling down. We can't do that. We just got to liven it up. We got to bring more people into the bubble. Let's get back on subject here. Yeah, no, it is very. It is missing the mark. That is such a great way of classifying sin. Especially most sin, and for us as, I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous in saying this, but I would assume us here doing this podcast and most of our listeners, people who genuinely want to live an authentic Catholic life following Jesus. When we do sin, it really is just missing the mark, and sometimes it's barely. It's just like you fall into it. You're just like, you're just like, I know this is right, but the temptation just takes you over. Yeah, it's one of the frustrating things, I think. I don't know about you guys, but it's like I now, for myself, I can tell when I'm like actively pushing God away, and it's just like, but it's like, no, this worldly thing, this shiny worldly thing must take my time. I'm not talking necessarily about like grave mortal sins, but just, abandoning God for this temporal thing when we know better. It's I don't know, it's a form of craziness, I guess.
Yeah, and I think maybe in closing, the other aspect that we kind of need to keep in mind is that, in some sense, we needed that. We needed the original sin, right? Being the Easter season at the Exultet at the Easter Vigil, which, as we all know, is Nathan's favorite part of Lent. One of those lines is,
Thank you.
"O happy fault, which gained for us so great a Redeemer."
Oh, necessary sinner.
Yeah. Right. I'm gonna riff on the Catechism here. The Catechism points us towards two other lines from the saints. I think Saint Leo the Great says that Christ's inexpressible grace gave us blessings better than those the demon's envy had taken away. And Saint Thomas Aquinas writes that there's nothing to prevent human nature's being raised up to something greater, even after sin. God permits evil in order to draw forth some greater good.
Well, on that note, fellas, thank you for your contributions today. And as we dive ever so slowly, methodically, and hopefully bring new insights to the Faith Study series. We encourage you to join Faith Studies at St. Anthony of Padua's. And thank you again for joining us. And this was Linus Juan Cristosanto. I'm Nathan Ramore. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
God bless.
Thanks for listening to Sunrise Disco. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support us, please share it with others. You can post about it on your social media or drop a review or rating below. Got questions or want to chat about something brought up this past episode? You can reach us at sunrisedisco.sapv@gmail.com. To catch all the latest from us, make sure you click that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again. God bless you, and we'll catch you next time.